June 18, 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The jungle was burning before anyone saw the flames. It started as a low hiss, like steam leaking from some unseen pipe beneath the earth. Then the smell hit, thick, chemical, oily, crawling through the humid air that already stank of cordite, rotting leaves, and days-old death. Private First Class Joe Ramirez pressed his cheek into the damp volcanic soil and tasted grit on his tongue. His M1 rifle dug into his ribs as another Japanese machine gun burst ripped through the brush ahead, snapping branches and showering him with splinters. Somewhere to his right, a man screamed and then went quiet. "Ramirez, eyes front." The bark came from Staff Sergeant Bill Hanley, 32 years old, helmet scuffed, web gear caked in black mud. The white stencil on his pack read what everyone in the platoon already knew: assault, flame. You, the viewer, are right there with them, lying in the muck, your heart hammering as that strange new hiss grows louder. You can't see it yet, but you know something different is coming. The men feel it too. They've all heard the rumors. 30 yards ahead, half hidden by tangled roots and blasted tree stumps, a Japanese concrete pillbox squatted like a buried animal. Its firing slit was no bigger than a mailbox slot, but from that gap poured death. 7.7mm rounds raking the Marines' line every time someone so much as twitched. Hand grenades had bounced harmlessly off its face. Rifle grenades, satchel charges, wasted. The thing might as well have been a bunker built into the side of a mountain. "Machine Gun 1, keep that slip panned," Hanley yelled, waving his arm forward. "Flame team, on me." Joe stole a glance left. That's when he saw it. Corporal Eddie Shorty McKenna was already moving up, hunched over like a man carrying someone on his back. Only it wasn't a person. It was the M2 Flamethrower. Twin cylindrical tanks, painted dull green, clung to his shoulders with thick straps. A rubber hose snaked forward from the rig into a metal wand that looked like a cross between a rifle and a fuel pump nozzle. The M2 gleamed with a sheen of sweat and oil. Each step McKenna took, the tanks clinked softly. 70 pounds of gasoline, thickened with napalm powder. Enough, they'd been told, to burn for just seconds at a time. Seconds that changed everything. "Jesus," Joe muttered under his breath. He'd seen the training films at Camp Pendleton, but that had been grainy black and white footage on a screen. This was real. This thing smelled dangerous. The Japanese gun opened up again, tracer slashing low across the clearing. Dirt spat up around the assault team, a wild, angry buzz passing inches from Hanley's helmet. Both men hit the ground hard, McKenna rolling to protect the tanks on his back. "Can he hit us?" McKenna panted. "Not if you stay low," Hanley replied, eyes never leaving the bunker. "Stay behind that lip. We're gonna crawl." He looked back at Joe and the others pinned across the line. "Ramirez, covering fire when I yell. I don't care if you shoot the island in half. Just keep their heads down." Joe nodded, throat dry. His fingers flexed around the stock of his Garand. He could feel every nick in the wood, every grain of sweat under his helmet strap. Up ahead, Hanley slapped McKenna's shoulder. "Ready?" The flamethrower man swallowed. "Yes, Sarge." They started crawling, pushing forward through the mud, the hose dragging a shiny trail behind them. Each foot gained felt like a mile. Machine Gun 1 roared to life, its bar answering, and other rifles joined in, sharp, desperate cracks aimed at that dark slit in the concrete. "Now, Ramirez!" Joe's world shrank to the front sight post of his rifle. He squeezed the trigger. Boom, 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 sending shot after shot toward the bunker, not trying to hit a man, just trying to fill that aperture with lead and fear. The jungle exploded into noise. Automatic fire, ricochets, splintering wood, the distant thump of naval guns still pounding the inland ridges. Through the chaos, Handley and McKenna slid into a shallow depression just 15 yards from the pillbox. From here, the bunker seemed to loom, squat and hungry, edges blackened where earlier attempts had charred but not cracked it. The firing slit had gone dark for the moment, but everyone knew the Japanese inside were still there, waiting. "Okay, Shorty," Handley said, voice steady but low. "This is it. You pop up, give 'em a 3-second burst, straight into the slit, then walk it across the face. I'll cover."
3 seconds, McKenna repeated, shivering, not from cold, but from something else entirely. "That's all I got." He adjusted the harness, feeling the weight of the fuel on his shoulders, the hard metal of the nitrogen pressure tank between the gasoline cylinders. Thumb brushed the ignition switch on the wand grip, an electrical trigger that would send a spark to the nozzle, turning fuel into something far worse. You can almost hear his breathing now, harsh and uneven under the roar of gunfire. You can feel the heat rolling out of the jungle, mixing with the promise of even greater heat still trapped in those tanks. "On 3, Handley said. 1, 2. The bunker's machine gun erupted again, rounds slicing overhead. Handley flinched, then shouted, 3! McKenna surged up to a kneeling position, the wand snapping into his hands like a rifle at the ready. For a split second, he had a perfect, awful view into the pillbox slit, dark shapes, movement, helmets, the flash of a muzzle. He squeezed the trigger. The hiss he'd heard earlier became a roar, a living thing unleashed. A narrow jet of viscous fuel blasted out of the nozzle, then, thump, ignited into a streaming tongue of fire that leapt across the distance as if the air itself had caught flame. In less than a heartbeat, the inside of the bunker turned from darkness into a furnace. The flames didn't just burn, they pushed, slamming into the pillbox like a tidal wave. Liquid fire splashed against the interior walls, clinging to everything it touched. The Japanese soldiers inside didn't even have time to scream before the bunker filled with searing orange light and choking black smoke. Joe Ramirez watched from the firing line, eyes wide as the fire jet curled and churned, almost alive. He'd expected fire, but this was something unholy, a force that made even bullets seem small. McKenna held the trigger down. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. "Down!" Handley yanked him backward as a geyser of flame pulsed out of the slit like the bunker itself was exhaling fire. McKenna collapsed behind cover, gasping, his tank harness clanking against stone. His hands trembled, the wand still hot in his grip. Did I get him?" Handley peeked over the lip and swore. The whole damn position's lit up. The flames inside continued to feed on the trapped oxygen. You could hear it, whump, 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 like a beast devouring whatever dared to survive. Smoke billowed upward, thick and greasy, sending sparks spiraling into the dense canopy. The Japanese defenders weren't silent anymore. Panic rose from inside the pillbox, rapid footsteps, shouted orders, someone coughing hard enough to sound like tearing metal. A body stumbled out of the side entrance, uniform blazing like a torch. The man fell, rolled, and twitched before going still. Another burst of rifle fire, this time from behind the bunker. There had been more soldiers hidden there, guns aimed at Handley's position. But before they could fire again, Charlie's squad swept in from the flank, BAR chattering as Marines cut them down. "Keep pushing," Handley barked. "Flame team forward, we're clearing that nest." McKenna's tank was half empty already, just about 6 seconds of fuel left, but the Japanese weren't done. Not here, not ever. Joe scrambled up with the rest of the platoon as they moved past the burning pillbox. The heat hit him like a solid wall, hair singeing, lashes curling, sweat exploding from every pore. The bunker itself began to crack and pop, concrete spalling under the sudden temperature shift. Someone shouted, "Left, cave entrance!" Joe turned and saw another fortification, an opening just behind the flame-scorched bunker, carved into the hillside and reinforced with timber. Dark, quiet, too quiet. Handley saw it too. "McKenna, that's your next target." McKenna shook his head, panting. "I'm nearly dry. We just need enough to wake 'em up."
Hanley slapped the tanks. "Move!" The Marines formed a loose semicircle, rifles up, covering the advance. They had learned fast. A bunker was never alone. A cave always had friends deeper inside. McKenna pressed himself tight against the cave mouth, flame wand extended. "Any movement?" Hanley whispered.
Joe squinted, adjusting his rifle grip. The cave stared back, black and cold, like a doorway into some ancient hell. "No movement," Joe answered. Hanley nodded. "Do it." McKenna flipped the igniter back on. The wand hummed with pressure. He fired. The fire didn't rush inward. It poured, pooling across the cave floor before erupting into a blazing inferno that sucked in the air around him. A sudden gust blasted outward, hot wind and shrieking embers, as voices from deep inside the tunnel rose in terrified cries. Then came the explosions, grenades cooking off, ammo igniting, the cave betraying its entire hidden arsenal to the flames. The earth shook, rocks tumbled. A roar like thunder rolled from the hillside. Then the cave entrance collapsed in on itself, sealing everything and everyone inside. Silence. Only the crackle of fire remained. Joe stood frozen, chest heaving. He looked at McKenna, who was staring at the caved-in entrance, face pale beneath the grime. "Jesus," Joe whispered. "They were just gone." Hanley rested a hand on McKenna's shoulder. "Better them than us, kid. That's why you're here." But even Hanley couldn't hide the look in his eyes, a flicker of awe and fear. Because flamethrowers didn't just kill, they erased. And every Japanese soldier on this island had been taught to fight to the last man, which meant this was only the beginning. June 20th, 1944. Northern slopes of Mount Tapachao, Saipan. 2 days after the first bunker assault, the assault platoon pushed deeper into the island's heart, a twisting maze of coral ridges, razor-sharp rock, and dense thickets where sunlight disappeared. Every step was a gamble. Every shadow could hide a dozen rifles. And every cave could be another tomb waiting to be sealed. Joe Ramirez climbed over a jagged outcrop, boots scraping stone, sweat stinging his eyes. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the air shimmered with rising heat. Below them, naval guns still hammered the coastline, distant booms that trembled through the earth like a giant's heartbeat. "Keep your spacing," Hanley called from the front. "They want us bunched up when they hit us." The Japanese defenders on Saipan had transformed the island into a fortress. Interlocking tunnels, spider holes, pillboxes disguised beneath foliage and coral. Many positions couldn't be reached from behind or above. Grenades bounced off, artillery barely scratched them. But fire? Fire seeped into every crack. That was why the Americans brought M2 teams, because the enemy had dug into the island like a cancer, and only something that could melt flesh and stone would root them out. As they advanced, they passed a line of stretchers being carried back, corpsmen whispering hurried prayers over the men they couldn't save. Joe looked away. He didn't want to count how many of those faces he recognized. Ahead, Sergeant Hanley raised a clenched fist. "Halt!" The platoon froze. A low rumble echoed from within the ground itself. It wasn't artillery. It wasn't thunder. It was closer, alive. Every man dropped, rifles aimed in every direction. Silence stretched so long Joe thought his own pulse might give them away. Then, crack! A hidden trap door snapped open in the ground, not 10 feet from the lead Marines. 2 Japanese soldiers burst upward like demons from under the earth, one wielding a bayonet, the other a Type 100 submachine gun already spraying. The first Marine took 2 rounds before his buddy slammed the attacker back into the hole with a rifle butt. But more gunfire erupted, shots coming from vents and slits invisible in the coral. Hanley roared, "McKenna, get that tank up here!" Shorty McKenna crawled forward fast,
flame wand tucked tight. The tanks rattled against his back with every movement. Joe saw motion, 3 more Japanese charging from a camouflage tunnel entrance, yelling as they leveled their rifles. Joe fired first, his Garand bucking as one enemy dropped. Another dove behind cover. The third kept coming. Hanley didn't hesitate. He stepped straight into the man's path, pumping 2 shots into his chest so hard the soldier spun before collapsing. The ground still rattled under them, more voices rising, echoing from below. Hanley pointed toward the tunnel. "That's a main line. They'll keep coming until we shut it." He turned to McKenna. "You've got 1 full load left?" McKenna nodded, breath shaky but eyes hard. "Enough to cook whatever's down there." The entrance was a slit barely as wide as a man, reinforced with timber and stone. Cold air wafted out, damp, rotten, smelling of mold and gun oil. McKenna edged forward. His gloved finger rested on the trigger. "Everyone ready?" Hanley asked. Joe locked a new clip into his rifle, pong, and lowered into a firing stance. "Do it." McKenna stepped into the open, and the tunnel erupted. A Japanese soldier hurled himself out, a satchel charge clutched in both hands, fuse already burning. Joe barely had time to shout, "Grenade!" Hanley slammed into McKenna, knocking him aside as the attacker crashed forward. 2 BAR rounds struck the satchel carrier mid-leap. The explosion came instantly. Ka-choom! A blast of earth and fire tore through the clearing, showering Marines with coral shards and blood. Joe hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision spinning. Smoke, screams, dirt raining from above. When the dust settled, Hanley pushed himself up, coughing. He looked down. McKenna lay sprawled beside him, tanks dented but intact. "You good?" Hanley rasped. McKenna winced, clutching his ribs. "Yeah, mostly." Hanley helped him to his feet. His voice lowered, but the intensity sharpened. "That's why we keep you alive, Shorty. They know what you can do." He wasn't wrong. The Japanese feared the flamethrower more than any other weapon. Not because it killed, but because it guaranteed death. No surrender, no mercy, no escape. Joe looked at the flame rig and realized this wasn't just a weapon. This was an executioner strapped to a Marine's back, and the island was full of sentences waiting to be carried out. June 22, 1944. Southern foothills of Mount Tapochau. Darkness crept across Saipan like ink poured over a broken world. Night was the Japanese soldiers' ally and the American Marines' nightmare. Joe Ramirez crouched in a shallow foxhole, helmet tilted low, rifle laid across his knees. The jungle around him seethed with sound, crickets, wind, distant artillery, and something else, something that felt like eyes. He whispered toward the man beside him. "You hear that?" Corporal Adkins nodded slowly. "They're moving, getting close." The Japanese always attacked at night. They would crawl on their bellies through muskeg and vine, silently circling, searching for a weak seam in the American line. No mortars, no warning, just screams and steel suddenly ripping through the dark. Joe wiped his palms on his trousers, trying to calm the shaking in his fingers. The ground still trembled with the distant boom of naval shells pulverizing the island's interior, but it felt far away, like another war entirely. Then a hand clamped Joe's shoulder. He nearly fired. "Easy," Sergeant Hanley hissed. He dropped into the foxhole, breath tight, voice low. "Shorty set up behind us. If they break through, you fall back to him." Joe swallowed. "They're coming?" Hanley nodded once. "Soon." A flare suddenly arced overhead, whoosh, bursting in the harsh white light that washed the jungle in ghostly shadows. For a split second, Joe saw them. Dozens of Japanese troops crouched among the trees, frozen mid-creep like feral animals caught in a spotlight. Then the flare burned out, and the world went black again. Silence. Then, Banzai! It came like a tidal wave of voices, screaming, roaring, pounding feet, rifles firing blind into the night as the Japanese charged forward with wild, reckless fury. The Marines answered with everything they had. Rifles cracked, BARs chattered, tracers cut red lines into the dark. Men shouted fire orders, shouted warnings, shouted prayers. Joe fired until his rifle clicked empty. Chick, chick, chang, grabbed another clip, slammed it down, fired again. Shadows rushed at the foxhole, figures swinging swords and bayonets. One leapt in. Joe barely got his rifle up in time. The bayonet scraped steel, sparks, and the two men crashed into the dirt. The Japanese soldier snarled, breath hot and sour. Joe kneed him hard, grabbed his own knife, and drove it upward, once, twice. The screaming stopped. Another attacker trampled over his comrade's body, rifle butt swinging. But a shotgun blast from Atkins blew him backward in a spray of leaves and blood. Still, they kept coming. "Fall back," Hanley's voice cut through the chaos. "Fall back to the flame." Joe scrambled out of the hole, shoving through brush as the line collapsed inward. Behind a mound of rocks, McKenna crouched with the flamethrower wand ready, tanks glinting faintly. He was shaken, but his jaw was set. "Wait for my mark," Hanley shouted. "Let 'em get close." Close? Joe thought. They were already too close. Shapes surged through the darkness, bodies, blades, rifles, driven not by tactics but pure will. The Marines stumbled backward, firing desperately, buying inches with blood. Hanley banged the rock with his fist. "Shorty, now!" McKenna stood up and pulled the trigger. A ribbon of fire burst forward, a sweeping fan that turned the night into an inferno. The flames didn't just illuminate the attackers, they consumed them. Japanese soldiers who had been leaping forward suddenly turned into silhouettes of burning agony, arms flailing as they collapsed into thrashing heaps. The flames licked across the ground, catching on packs, uniforms, ammo. Then the spare rounds detonated, popping like fireworks, each explosion a gruesome punctuation. The charge faltered, then broke. Those who weren't burning fled screaming into the darkness, disappearing into smoke and terror. McKenna's fuel sputtered, hissed, then died. The assault was over. Joe stood rigid, chest heaving, staring into the blackened clearing that moments before had roared with fury. Now it smelled of cooked flesh and scorched earth. A sound behind him, McKenna collapsed into his knees, the empty flamethrower wand slipping from numb fingers. Hanley crouched next to him. "Shorty, you did it." McKenna didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the charred remains in front of him, eyes wide, hollow. "You did what you had to," Hanley repeated, softer this time. But Joe knew what McKenna was thinking, what they all were thinking. Killing a man with a bullet was one thing. This was turning men into fuel. Yet tomorrow they would do it again, because that was the only way off this island alive. June 24th, 1944. Southeast ridges of Saipan. The sun rose heavy and red, like it too was exhausted from the bloodshed. The Marines pressed on, boots crunching across coral teeth and blackened roots still smoldering from the night before. Word filtered down the line. The final defensive complex was ahead. A honeycomb fortress of caves and bunkers carved into the hillside, command center, ammo depots, med stations, and barracks all buried beneath rock. Thousands of Japanese troops were believed to be within. If this place held, Saipan might never fall. Sergeant Hanley halted the platoon behind a jagged outcrop overlooking the stronghold. Binoculars lifted, jaw tightening. "There," he said, pointing toward pillbox slits built seamlessly into stone. "That's their nerve center." Joe looked at McKenna. The flamethrower man rubbed a thumb absent-mindedly along the dent in his tank, the scar from the satchel charge 2 days before. "You good?" Joe asked. McKenna exhaled slowly. "Good enough. The assault would be simple on paper. Flamethrowers and satchel charges lead. Rifles and bars cover. Push forward until nothing shoots back." Simple plans were often the deadliest. Hanley raised his arm. "Move out." The first 100 yards went smoothly, too smoothly. No gunfire, no movement, just the quiet that comes right before teeth close around the throat. "Feels wrong," Adkins muttered. Hanley nodded. "Stay sharp." They approached the first bunker, and McKenna advanced with wand raised, when the earth erupted. A hidden minefield burst into flames and shrapnel, shredding the ground under the lead squad. Men screamed as they fell, some blown apart, others crawling with legs twisted at impossible angles. Machine guns opened from every direction, crossfire from slits Joe had never even seen. Dust and coral blasted into their faces. "Down! Find cover!" Hanley roared. Joe crashed behind a boulder as rounds chipped stone inches from his skull. The air filled with urgent radio calls, corpsemen dragging wounded, bullets whining like hornets. Hanley slid in beside him. "We're pinned. They knew we were coming." Joe's pulse hammered his ribs. "What do we do?" Hanley looked at the bunker ahead, just 40 yards away, unscarred, untouched by fire. He wiped sweat from his eyes. "We get that flamethrower into position. That's what we do." He called out, "Shorty, with me." McKenna nodded. Even fear couldn't stop his feet. Crawling low beneath the firestorm, he and Hanley worked toward a shallow depression halfway.
To the bunker. Bullets cracked overhead like snapping bones. Another Marine tried to follow and was cut down instantly. Joe cursed under his breath and fired at the bunker slit, trying to distract the gunner. A bar gunner added his rhythm, brap, 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 sparks lighting the firing port. Hanley shouted back across the line, "We need a smoke screen!" Two riflemen pulled grenades, yanked pins with their teeth, and hurled them forward. Thick gray clouds billowed upward, finally blinding the bunker gunners. "Go, Shorty, go!" Hanley shoved McKenna forward. McKenna sprinted the final distance, sliding belly first against the concrete wall of the bunker like a man hugging safety itself. His breath shuddered, sweat poured, but he kept moving. Probe wand up, igniter on, thumb trembling. He wasn't aiming blindly. He saw shapes moving behind the slit, shadows preparing to kill them all. Hanley pointed, "Burn it." McKenna squeezed the trigger. Fire erupted, fuel surging, a roaring jet punching straight inside. Then a blast. A chain reaction of stored grenades cooking off inside the bunker. Boom, boom, boom. The entire concrete face bulged outward, cracked, then disintegrated in a storm of rock and flame. The hillside lit up like a funeral pyre. Even Marines who'd seen fire before stopped firing, stunned. Joe whispered, "Holy Mother." Hanley placed a steadying hand on McKenna's shoulder. "That's one. We keep going." Because beyond the smoke, deeper in the mountain, thousands more enemies still waited, clutching rifles, bayonets, and grenades, fear finally clawing at their chests. They had believed their island was impregnable. They had believed no fire could reach them. They were wrong, and they knew it now. June 26, 1944. The inner ridge of Saipan, beneath a fortress of blackened coral. Smoke clung to the air like a choking fog. The assault platoon moved deeper into the defensive complex, through corridors of twisted rebar, shattered concrete, and charred remains still glowing faintly beneath ash. Joe Ramirez stepped over what used to be a machine gun nest. The position had been melted down into slag. The barrel curled like a peeled banana. The ammo cans fused into the rock beneath them. "Watch that edge," Hanley warned, ground still soft from the burn. McKenna didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, the flamethrower wand held close. The deeper they pushed, the quieter it got. No insect buzz, no breeze, just the crunch of boots pressing through the dead zone. The silence was worse than the screaming. "Feels like the devil's front yard," Adkins muttered. Hanley gave the signal, flattened against the wall. Another cave mouth loomed in front of them, bigger, reinforced, and carved with precision. This wasn't a simple fighting position. This was a command cave. The enemy in here would be officers, harder, smarter, and even more determined to die taking Americans with them.
Hanley whispered, "No warning shots. We give them the fire before they know we're here." He looked at McKenna. "You ready?" McKenna swallowed once and nodded. Joe raised his rifle, every nerve burning. The Marines fanned out, covering every angle. Hanley counted down silently with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. They struck. Grenades rolled inside, ka-thump, and the blast rocked the cave. Before the dust even settled, Hanley waves McKenna forward. Shorty surged into the entrance, igniter clicking, fuel roaring. The fire jet blasted deep into the darkness, but this time the cave answered. A hail of bullets poured out, sparks flashing off the nozzle and the rock inches from Shorty's face. He stumbled backward, diving for cover as stone chips stung his cheek. "They're dug in deep," Joe shouted. Hanley's jaw clenched. He scanned the structure. Columns of coral supporting the entrance, timbers braced behind them. "Joe, Adkins," he pointed. "Satchel charges, bring it down." Joe slung his rifle and crawled forward, pulling a canvas sack packed with composite explosive from his belt. Adkins mirrored him. Bullets whined overhead, but the firing was blind, aimed at the cave mouth, not at specific targets. Joe planted the charge along the left support beam, hands working purely on instinct. Pin out, fuse set, shove, and press. "Fire in the hole!" he screamed, and they dove behind cover. Wham! The left side of the entrance collapsed inward, sending choking dust and broken timbers cascading. The gunfire faltered. Hanley didn't hesitate. "Shorty, finish it." McKenna rose, and the wand ignited again, a roaring sun unleashed into the tomb. This time, the fire didn't stop at the entrance. It sucked itself forward, drawn by the oxygen hidden deeper inside. The jet turned into a swirling tornado of flame, disappearing into the depths, feeding, expanding, hunting. Deep inside the cave, something ignited. A fuel dump, ammunition stores. The world convulsed. The blast erupted outward like a volcanic eruption, bodies, weapons, timbers, and fire spewing into the air. Marines threw themselves to the ground as the shock wave tore past them. When Joe lifted his head, the entrance was gone. The entire structure collapsed inward in a smoldering crater. A single helmet rolled to a stop against Joe's boot, blackened, paint bubbling like boiling tar. Silence returned. Flies began to gather. McKenna's shoulders heaved with each breath. He'd killed hidden men before, but this time he had killed dozens in a single squeeze of the trigger. Hanley knelt beside him. "You did what artillery couldn't," he said quietly. "What 8-inch guns couldn't." McKenna didn't look up. He stared into the smoking crater and whispered, "God forgive me," because even victory didn't feel like triumph anymore. War wasn't glory. War was erasure. And the mountain still wasn't done burning. June 28, 1944, night again. But this time, the Japanese were not planning an attack. They were preparing to die. Every Marine on Saipan felt it in their bones. The enemy was cornered. The last ridges had fallen. Command caves were dust. Ammunition was nearly gone. And yet, no one expected what came next. Joe Ramirez sat on a crate near the forward aid station, helmet off, wiping grime from his eyes. Corpsmen worked under flickering lanterns, bandaging wounds, comforting men who wouldn't see sunrise. Across from him, McKenna sat silently, tank harness removed, his back hunched as if the weight of the flamethrower was still strapped to him. His lips moved without sound. Prayer or guilt, it was hard to tell which. Hanley approached, his voice low. "Get some chow. We move again at dawn." McKenna didn't respond. Joe spoke instead. "You really think they'll hold out?" Hanley's eyes were tired. "No, but they won't give up either." He wasn't wrong. Just before midnight, gunfire crackled from the ridge. Then screams. Dozens, then hundreds. Not just soldiers, civilians, women, children. Joe and McKenna sprinted toward the clamor, rifles raised, only to reach a cliffside where chaos churned under moonlight. Japanese civilians, convinced by their leaders that Americans would torture and kill them, were jumping into the sea below. Some soldiers were forcing them over. Others took the leap themselves, grenades clutched to their chests. "Stop them!" Hanley bellowed. He pushed through the madness, reaching for a terrified woman holding a baby. It's okay, we're not." But she pulled away, screaming, and disappeared over the edge before he could grab her hand. Joe froze, heart pounding, rifle limp, watching lives shatter on the rocks below. War had stripped everything from these people. Hope, reason, fear itself. All that remained was desperation. McKenna stepped backward, eyes wide, shaking violently. "No more," he whispered. "God, no more." Hanley turned, gripping McKenna's shoulders. "We can't save everyone, but we finish this and fewer die." McKenna's jaw trembled as he tried to believe that. Joe stood beside them, face pale in the moonlight. He had killed many men in the past weeks, but watching innocents die shook him deeper than a shell blast ever could. The cries from the cliffs gradually faded, replaced by the distant rumble of surf and the crackle of small brush fires still burning from earlier battles. The night ended in a heavy silence, a silence that felt like mourning. When dawn finally broke, the Marines moved again, because that was the only direction left, forward, toward the last pockets of resistance, toward the last defenders who would rather burn than surrender. And the man carrying fire walked among them, haunted eyes, burned hands, but marching just the same. Tomorrow would be the final push. The fire would come again. And before this island fell, the world would witness the length soldiers would go to defend homeland or to survive hell. July 7th, 1944, the final day. The Japanese commander on Saipan, General Saito, had issued his last order, a final Banzai charge with every man still breathing. Over 3,000 Japanese soldiers stormed the American lines in the largest suicide attack of the Pacific War. They came with bayonets, with swords, with bamboo spears, anything that could kill. They broke through several units. They overran aid stations. They slaughtered the wounded where they lay. Morning came with chaos. Joe Ramirez woke to explosions and screaming all around him. He fired as fast as he could, barely able to see through the mass of bodies pushing forward. The line buckled, then snapped, Marines scrambling to new fallback points. Hanley grabbed Joe by the shoulder. "Where's Shorty?" Joe turned. McKenna was already moving up a rocky slope, flamethrower tanks strapped tight once more. A Japanese officer charged toward him with a drawn katana. McKenna flicked the igniter. A split-second jet, and the blade, the uniform, the man, turned into a pillar of flame before he hit the ground. But the flamethrower painted a target as bright as daylight. Rifles cracked from the ridge. Bullets zipped past in angry whines. One punched into McKenna's left arm. Another glanced off the tank shell. He stumbled, nearly fell, but kept going. Hanley roared, "Ramirez, cover him!" Joe fired until the Garand clip pinged out. Loaded another. Fired again. He wasn't shooting men. He was shooting at shapes trying to kill the man carrying the fire that kept them alive. McKenna reached a cluster of rocks, the last barrier before the heart of the Japanese line. Grenades landed around him in bursts of dirt and flame. He pushed forward anyway, dragging nearly 75 pounds of steel and gasoline through hell. Hanley ran to his side, yelling over the thunder. "This is it, Shorty. One more bunker, then we break 'em." The final bunker stood ahead, a heavy structure built into a concave cliff wall. Inside, machine guns hammered non-stop. Marines trying to flank it were shredded instantly. This bunker was the last tooth of the beast. Break it, and the battle ends. McKenna breathed in, hard and slow. Blood dripped from his fingers. His vision swam. Joe saw it in his eyes, exhaustion, pain, but also resolve. McKenna turned the ignition on. Hanley gripped his shoulder once, a silent thank you. Shorty stepped forward, fire wand raised, and sprinted straight at the bunker. Gunfire tore into him. He cried out, stumbled, but kept going. Tanks rattled, igniter sparked, a roar began to build. Then the world turned white.
A direct hit struck the nitrogen tank, a sound like tearing thunder, and McKenna vanished in a fireball that lit the entire ridge. The explosion blew the bunker's firing port inward, flames racing through the structure like a living demon. The gunfire stopped. Screams echoed only for a moment before becoming smoke. Joe stared, frozen, his rifle limp in his hands. Hanley stood silent, head bowed. The line surged forward. Marines swept the ridge. Saipan was finally falling. But at a cost measured not in ground gained, but in the men who carried the flame. Joe knelt where McKenna had stood only seconds before. He picked up a piece of scorched metal, the shattered remains of the wand trigger, and held it tight, ignoring the heat. Hanley spoke quietly. "He saved us all." Joe nodded, jaw clenched, his vision blurred with the sting of smoke and grief. There would be medals, there would be praise, there would be history books. But none of that would bring back the man who had walked into hell again and again and again, so others didn't have to. The battle for Saipan ended that day. And on that blackened ridge, surrounded by ash and silence, the Marines finally understood. Sometimes victory is a fire that never goes out.